Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us on our first of what I hope to be many video chats. With everything that's happening out there in the world, we are trying to adapt as Philanthropy Impact, and we're doing it as quickly as we possibly can. And we hope that this series develops as things develop out there. I would like to start by saying a huge thank you to George, Jamie, Alana, John and Heiko for joining us and for stepping up to the plate to do this first one with us. I'm really super grateful, so thank you very, very much.
Sophia, just before you introduce George to take over, do you want me to give a 1-minute overview of who we are for everyone who's joined us?
Thanks, John.
Philanthropy Impact is a charity, and our sole purpose is to increase philanthropic giving and social investment across Europe. We are completely cause neutral. And our uniqueness is that we work with professional advisors to high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. So bankers, lawyers, investors, wealth advisors, etc. And what we do is we encourage them, we run training programs for them so that they can support their clients on their donor and social impact investment journey. We also run about 20 to 25 events a year, and at those events, we'll get around 40 to 80 people. So there'll be professional advisors as well as philanthropists, trusts, foundations, social investors, impact investors, and charities. We want people to learn from each other. We also have a magazine and we have a website which is being updated, but contains tons and tons of really helpful material for advisors and for philanthropists, etc. Jamie, do you want to add anything more to what I just said? Does that help?
No, that's great. Let's go with that.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Jamie just joined our board. Okay, Sophie, back to you.
Okay, so today this is just a conversation that our board members and our lovely committee in Zurich have joined. If you have questions, please join in. It's a 30-minute thing. We are strictly going to end at 4:30. So I would like to now just hand over to George so he can make a start. But any questions, please contact me via the chat and I will help if you're having any troubles. All right? At the end, there'll be a chance to feed back to me on any topics that you'd like to be covering as well. So it's really good to meet you all. And take it away, George.
Appreciate that. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I think whoever's on the line, hopefully you'll have come across at least some of us in the past before in one capacity or another. You know, what we're all dealing with is unprecedented in many ways. I just want to sort of make a couple of quick opening comments and then get everybody involved in a conversation here. For my sins, I'm involved in a couple of charitable boards, and there have been, and I think many of you who have similar engagement will have been involved in quite a lot of desperate phone calls and emails and so forth over the last few weeks, as not just all of us as individuals and all of us in our corporate lives, but the philanthropic and charitable sector is being significantly hit by what's going on. Philanthropy Impact, as John has highlighted, sits at this unusual and important nexus between working professionals, accountants, attorneys, lawyers, wealth managers, what have you, with people with resources, including money, but also time and expertise, and organizations that are trying to help meet a range of needs, which in this environment have become more acute and really quite unusual and challenging. So it's a nice time to be trying this new format. I'll ask each of you who have joined us to just say if you're asking a question on the line, please say your name and who you're with and ask your question clearly. And our honored guest expert speakers, if you can just, the first time you speak, just say a word or two about sort of your background so that people understand the perspective that you're bringing to the conversation. and Jamie, I haven't seen you in a while. I'll start with you and just ask, given that you've had a very diverse background in doing some really cool stuff now with impact investing, so you straddle the investment and philanthropy circles. Maybe start us off with what you have been doing or seeing in your journeys, given the changes over the last few weeks. Just give us a little bit of an insight about what you've been seeing.
Well, thanks, George. I'm James Broderick, and my background is wealth management and asset management. But for the last 2 years, I've been working with the Impact Investing Institute and its predecessor organizations. I mean, in answer to your question, what I've been doing for the last couple of days and over the weekend is addressing the quite urgent issue of how to get funding to small and medium enterprises, including social enterprises and to some degree some charities. Is I think there's been, one of the most concerning developments is the financial sustainability of social enterprises and charities. And so the question is, how do we collectively, including with government, get funding to some of those organizations? And that's what I've been working on over the last couple of days. The government has just set up what they call the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, operated by the British Business Bank. That provides funding, but the question is, even when, or provides a funding guarantee for these kinds of loans. The question is, how do you deliver it actually quick enough to the SMEs and social enterprises and charities to keep them viable?
Yeah, this is highly fluid as we see sort of new government support and various kinds of support coming out literally daily. I know maybe it's a good segue to go to Alana. I suspect, Alana, given where you sit, you're also engaging with a lot of different organizations, and it'd be useful to sort of hear your insights in terms of what you've been seeing and experiencing and the build-up so far.
I am on.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me? Yes, sorry, I just had a technical moment there of trying to unmute myself. These things, we're all trying to get up to speed and sharpen our technical skills lately. I can't be the only one. Yes, so I'm glad to be connecting with all of you. These are just insanely strange times. I'm a lawyer at Withers, and so my clients are nonprofit organizations themselves, but also, philanthropists, families, and the foundations that they set up. At any given time, it sort of skews, in a different way, but probably it's around half and half for my clients. So that does mean that I am seeing both perspectives on this. Definitely, I see that organizations are going to be stretched potentially beyond capacity. Some of them will not survive this situation. Very clearly, the most vulnerable people in our society are going to be hit most extremely by this, and so the charities that have been serving them, whether they are homeless shelters or food banks, are going to be asked to do more with less, and all while dealing with all of the operational challenges that all of our organizations are dealing with. How do you have staff work remotely? What do you do when staff start to get sick, and all of that? So at this moment, when we know what's coming really for nonprofit organizations, they will be asked to do more with less. We then also look to the philanthropy side, which is, what can and should funders be doing? We are seeing clients, already coming to us and saying, can we push this, a formation or establishment of a foundation? Can we get it expedited so that we can get moving quicker? We are seeing people make grant, contributions into vaccine research, into all sorts of things. And of course, I am very heartened to see the sort of rapid response funds that are being set up in a variety of places, people turning to their donor advised funds and making recommendations to get some capital moving out to where it needs to go. I hope that what we see is funders continuing to sort of ask check in with their grantees, see what is needed, see what is happening, and also ask themselves, what can we do right now? I am fearful that market performance may mean that some funders will try and retrench and pull back funding, and of course that would just be disastrous for vulnerable people and for the sector right now. So I'm hoping that we don't see a lot of that, but that's where I'm at. Glad to be connecting with you today, though.
Excellent. I had the same problem, by the way, getting unmuted. I think that problem you identify in terms of the interplay between actual wealth as well as just wealth effect and a sense of wealth with what's happening in markets and the impact on donor willingness and donor engagement is a really important one. And that's actually a nice segue into Heiko and your consultancy in this space. Heiko, maybe just say a couple words about who you are and what you do, and it'd be lovely to get your take on that, as well as, it may be too early, but are you seeing shifts or changes of any kind in what people are doing, or at least talking about doing philanthropically or social investment?
Well, I think we have to not to doubt about the shift. The shift has happened. It's then how we deal with the shift. I think that's a huge understanding of people now, raising question, what do we do now? And as most of you know, I'm looking at stuff from a more contextualized way. I run my own consultancy here out of Zurich, helping people to act more responsibly with their money and with their activities, particularly in their business, and targeting wealthy individuals, family offices, but also foundation, grant-making foundations, or more charitable organizations. And now, we are a little bit ahead of the game here, unfortunately, in Switzerland. The first fear waves has gone through all of us, to say, what do we do now, what we're dealing now with? And as Alana said, I'm glad to see there's a lot of rapid response funds popping up. And for some organizations, it seems to be more difficult to get to money. For other organizations, the flow of money seems to be going quite easy, or easier as it seems. I'm in a lot of discussion these days. How do we create the future now, which sounds rather positive, and like to remain optimistic about this, although this will all last longer than we probably would hope for. To see what do we do with the basic income now that's coming towards that? How do we deal with it? What does it mean? But also how do we get how do we help the farmers now get out the seeds in a way that we can have a harvest, because the usual helpers are not here to help us do that. The thing that I have with clients, but also with a lot of partnering organizations that I work with, is different ways of discussions which actually help us understand, to raise different questions that we usually have, to better understand how can we help the homeless shelters, how can we support and maintain now overflooding rescue houses for women here in Switzerland, because they apparently, if you're in quarantine and you're not going along very well with your husband, you go to these places. How do we do and deal with that in a most creative possible way that we can think of, when everybody has his own daily problems and as well fears coming up. So I see it from that perspective, how we can look at that more contextual.
Yeah. And I want to quickly bring Jamie back in just for a second on the same point about the interplay between investment and philanthropy. We are used to seeing people use appreciated assets to donate them and not pay capital gains tax and use that to fund their philanthropy, which maybe is constrained in this environment. We're used to people being advised not to sell something at a depressed level. And yet, Alana's comments about people going to DAFs to try and accelerate philanthropic activity and moving capital would mean selling assets, potentially, if they're invested assets at depressed levels. this interplay in this kind of market environment? Jamie, given your investment background, I'm curious if you have thoughts to help people just weigh these options between short-term, long-term, between trying to have an effect in the world, but also, you know, the effect of capital at depressed levels.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, George, but on the other hand, we're in an emergency and people have to be careful. You know, they can't be too agonized too much over their optimized capital gains strategy. I mean, if you've already invested in a DAF, you can go ahead and spend the money in a DAF without any concerns on the whole capital gain discussion. But I do think that we're in circumstances in which people need to, I don't know, lighten up a bit on their own wealth maximization and start to think more about the urgency of some of the things that are happening. And I think part of the philanthropy of this is making sure you get capital to worthy organizations quickly, like now, rather than spend too much time planning it. I mean, I guess that would be, you know, maybe that's not what a financial advisor would necessarily say to a client, but I just think intuitively we all have to respond really, really quickly here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good perspective, actually. Let me give a quick real live case study that Alana, Heiko might want to jump into, and Jamie, you're welcome to as well. I'm sitting on the board of a charity that has a small endowment. The endowment is meant to support this arts institution for a long period of time, so it's not a huge amount of money. And so the income is usually helping to top up when the productions don't meet the budget and so forth and so on. And in the current climate, with everything shut down and things much more dire, there's a question being asked of the board, the endowment board: do we seek to change the articles of the foundational principles of this, such that it can be used? This money now can be used for emergency support of the institution, as opposed to sort of its original intention. And I'd love to get perspectives of, sort of picking up on Jamie's point, this is an emergency. Is that the right course, sort of making sure that you keep the institution afloat, sort of leading the question there maybe. And a little bit around pros and cons or thoughts that organizations and people involved in these things might need to think about to support charities in these kind of situations. And so Alana, you might have some perspective there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have quite a good international group of folks here who are collected. We all have different regulatory regimes that we're in. In the UK, people do need to be careful and mindful around the concept of endowment. The term is sometimes used quite casually to simply mean where the board of a charity is conceiving of a pot of money as long-term benefit money or assets, but it also has a technical meaning when it is preceded by the word permanent, which is that actually the capital is subject to a legal restriction and mustn't be spent without authority. If a charity finds itself, if your charity you're talking about here, George, finds itself possessed of permanent endowment, then certainly any decision to dip into that capital needs to follow the restrictive rules about what is acceptable. It is possible to take a total return approach, of course, but if you're talking about actually spending capital for charitable projects now, in the UK at least, you're going to the regulator for consent there. But the wider question, of course, is such a challenging one. What is the right thing to do? If you're sitting on a pot of permanent endowment or any kind of endowment assets that were intended originally to maintain the long-term viability of the organization, what do you do really? I mean, it's a balancing act for the board in the circumstances, and that must weigh up, I think, what the other alternatives are in respect of other sources of funding, in respect of a stimulus package, or other bailouts, and what to do. An organization that is going to be laying off its staff and making hard decisions around how to keep operating, I think would be hard-pressed to justify sitting on a big pot of assets and not trying to use those, at least some of those, to continue actual delivery of services, because we're in such an emergency and unprecedented time. But it's really a decision for the board in all the circumstances as to what else is additionally possible, in terms of other funding and other solutions. But don't forget the regulatory piece. Get those consents.
Absolutely. I'll throw this as an open question to any of you to comment on. So, what's happening today is all about the coronavirus and COVID-19. And I guess there's some open question as to, well, what do you do with that, right? What role exactly might wealthy people play in responding to that, whether it's philanthropy or social investment or something else? How do you make those appeals, and what do you actually appeal for? I'm on the board of a charity supporting a hospital, and 3 weeks ago, we had a board meeting to discuss raising an emergency fund for purposes we didn't know what they were yet, and at a time where we only had one case at the hospital before this was really kicking off, and the hospital trust made the decision not to allow us to go forward with it because they wanted the message to be business as usual, not spreading alarm or concern, which is not the messaging we thought we were going to have. But there's a lot of questions here about who can do what and how do you message that to try and be responsive. And I'd love any insights, James, you have along those lines.
I would, what Alana said, I liked a lot of it, it's a lot to support these exchanges and responsibilities the board has, and have a bit more of this responsibility built in there, because a foundation, for example, there's a lot of foundations here that are drowning in applications now, even if they don't have anything to do with what they're doing. So where would I put the money now from my foundation within the strategy, or with a set-off strategy into a course that still aligns in a general sense with it? Because we can't forget a couple of the courses now, because they will play a role as well in the future. And I mean, that's something, what I'm sort of very surprised is that a lot we knew that was coming, but still blinded by even often ignorance of to be prepared for that. And hospitals are a good case for that. And it seems even that the delay that the Chinese or the Italian have had in responding is sort of going over to all other countries that sort of are affected. To see how can we have a different dialogue of coming to better reflected and decisions to be done. And I think that is very positive. I see a lot of more responsible conversations happening, more reflective conversations happening, different phone calls, different calls on Zoom or whatever have you these days, which probably lead to a different attitude. And I believe, I don't know how you see that, Alana, is that the authorities will be more flexible on this in at least in the coming 18 months, if not longer.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I think the cautionary note, I suppose, is not to assume that because we are in these unprecedented times that really anything goes. But yes, I think certainly most of what I'm hearing is that regulators are planning to be flexible, where possible. I also, I know, there are obviously lots of donor advised funds out there, but I am myself very encouraged to see what is happening there. I see Ted, I see your face on the Ted Hart from CAF. I see you there on the video. It's nice to see everyone, by the way. But I know you have a lot of, sort of stuff going on in respect of, sort of relief services on the ground and sort of releasing funds. But I just want to add in here, I think, I guess it's a bit of a personal note. Probably like most of you advisors, I am very emphatically cause neutral. With my clients, I don't prefer, even where my personal, beliefs may not align with clients' own priorities. But this really is a situation, I think, where we are going to see things get quite bad. And I am really encouraging clients, even in a way that I might not normally do. I'm getting in touch with clients and saying, if you need our help with mobilizing any sort of, unusual distributions outside your meeting framework, please let us know, because I want to actually encourage them to do something. I don't think that means that any foundation or individual donor needs to move away from their priorities. And I think that we all as advisors need to be clear about that. You don't need to start funding something you wouldn't have funded before. But do fund your existing grantees. You know, they probably need it, or do fund those organizations you do feel good about. And I think, you know, people are doing that individually. They're coming together. It's very heartening. I do think regulators are likely to be a bit more flexible. Sadly, I think we are in also a situation where there might be some you know, unscrupulous folks out there, or fraudulent folks out there who are looking to take advantage of foundations. So I would urge, you know, funders of all sorts to continue to do their good due diligence on their funding. I don't like to raise that, but I know it is something that's happened in other disaster scenarios. So sorry, I got a bit off piece there, but yes, I do think regulators are going to are going to take a flexible approach.
George, could I cut in for a sec? Sorry. Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Well,
Jamie.
what I was going to say was that, I mean, obviously the special problems of foundations are special, but for advisors who are advising individuals, I think it's possible for people to mobilize philanthropic donations immediately as they think through a longer term strategy. But what I wouldn't do is wait until you've thought through something quite elaborate, because I think the need is very urgent, and there are places to go. I mean, if you have, as I said before, if you have a DAF, this is what a DAF is for. You should be using your DAF right now, deploying your DAF right now as aggressively as you feel comfortable, and putting it out there as you think through maybe a more nuanced kind of strategy as you decide where the greatest need is. But you know, I think for your average high net worth individual, being advised by a non-specialist financial advisor, I think that there are places to go. I mean, my first stop is usually New Philanthropy Capital. I think they've done some recent blogs and articles that describe how should philanthropists be responding to the coronavirus? How can I act now? And gives you some ideas for the kinds of things you can do immediately, rather than agonize too much about sourcing the best place to put your money. I think it's really important for us to get the money out now. Sorry, John, go ahead.
That's okay. George, well, building on what Alana was saying, if you think of the UK, for example, well, I got two questions. One is, how are you all doing as advisors, professional advisors? Because there must be lots of stress in your life. And how do you balance that with the fact that close to 90% of the wealthy people in the UK hardly participate in philanthropy? And what is the role of professional advisors to encourage them to move away from very little giving at this time and very little social investment?
I'll jump in on this one real quick, John. I think these are extraordinary times, and I think it is the right thing for advisors to do, to be checking in proactively with clients. Obviously, it's sensitive how you do it. You know, you don't want to be intrusive to their situation or what they're up to, and you know, you certainly don't want to say, "Hey, how's it going in this crisis? What are you giving to?" You know, I wouldn't go that far, and I'm not going that far, but I certainly am getting in touch with clients that I know, you know, have DAFs, have foundations, you know, letting them know that we're there, sharing some resource with them, and you know, I think that is certainly worth doing. I wouldn't like myself personally to look back at this time and think that I had some access to folks who could do a little bit of something, but I didn't do something with that. So in the same way that I'm reaching, you know, into my own pocket and putting into, you know, charitable relief causes that I think are worthwhile and impactful, I'm trying to be a lever for that for clients. It is challenging and it's sensitive. So, you know, I get where everyone is on that, but I would encourage people to do it.
John, since you've asked the question, I'll switch hats and be a panelist for the question, and say that I think this would be a difficult time to initiate that conversation. If you've never talked to anyone before about the portion of their wealth and how they think about their wealth and the concept that includes philanthropy, this is probably a difficult time to start that conversation. But you know, as we say all the time, if you are an advisor in any capacity to wealthy people, that should be part of the engagement that you're having with them at the outset and throughout as a regular check-in. And so the regular checking in that I've been doing for these last couple of weeks with clients systematically is how are they feeling, how is their health, how's their family. It's giving them an update on what we know about what's happening with economies and markets and their investments. And then it's rechecking in about their goals, their values, what they care about, what's happening, making sure that these things are all still aligned, and asking, is there something we should be doing? It might be something as simple as someone had some money in dollars that now they can move into sterling more easily. We knew that that was a goal. We see what's happening, and that's applicable. And that is true also with philanthropic activity. We knew that someone had an interest in doing something. They had maybe funded a death, maybe hadn't gotten around to, whatever it is, but we ought to have some, if we're doing our job before this week, we ought to have some idea that this is part of the wealth makeup of our clients and therefore should be part of our conversation in this environment.
John, you mentioned social investment, and I would just say that I specialize in social investment. It's my favorite topic, but this is the moment for philanthropy. This is for money. This is the moment for people to give money away. It's very difficult to find social investments in this context, and the need is really much more urgent for philanthropy, and that's what I would urge people to be focusing on.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with this. This about philanthropy, and I think this is as well to ask for that philanthropic money that's been dedicated already to be spent at some point, particularly about giving pledges and so on. So now it's time to put this on the table. And sort of encourage other people to join in making their liquidity available for other people. And a lot of people these days have had cash in their accounts, and that's to be called now. And I think if we can help now get their head around where to give it and which direction it needs to be going, or could be going, I think that's a big one. There's one thing, George, that as well I ask a lot, and I've been asked that question. I like it a lot. In these client conversations that one has these days is, what does this all do to you? And I found it a very engaging question because everybody has some emotions about this, and it's not only how are you, but what does it really do to you is a different way of approaching it. And then you have a different sort of client conversation where as we say, this value-based emotional context come into place. Just wanted to share that.
That's excellent. So now I thought I heard Zofia say at the beginning that we are having just a short call at 30 minutes, and the first role of every chair is to stay on time. So I will sort of halt the formal proceedings. I'll invite any of our guest speakers if they want to say a single closing comment to wrap something up, but I think some of the recent closing comments have been helpful. And just draw everyone's attention to the group chat. If you haven't seen it, there have been some useful posts there that you should just turn your attention to. Don't feel like you need to make a closing statement, but there's something you'd like to wrap up. This is your chance to do so, Heiko or Alana or Jimmy.
Well, thanks, George. I would just say if you're saving your philanthropic resources for later, I don't know what you're saving it for. This is really the time to be counted.
I would just add a super. Oh, you go ahead, Heiko.
No, I think it's a lot about now. It's a time it's as well. There's a huge opportunity in all of this, but now we have to act with the philanthropic money, with a decent mindset. Take the responsibility and claim your responsibility back and be engaged.
I was just going to add a very practical closer, which is that I see people in the chat have put some links to publications and such. That reminds me that information sharing is so important at this kind of time, not least because there's a lot out there and it's easy to get inundated. We're all working, remotely, some of us for the first time, and it's easy to get sort of lost, I guess, in all of the information. But I think we do need to be sharing so that we're not reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of great stuff happening out there, and it can also be, of course, encouraging to funders to see what others are doing. So I'd encourage everyone to share, get in the sharing mode on information.
That is a great closing comment. Thanks, Lana. Well, look, this has been put together rather rapidly. I think it's fantastic that you've all been available. I think the insights coming out in such a short call have been fantastic and on point. John, I think this was your brainchild to do, and this is hopefully going to be continuing now. I think it's been a successful launch. So hopefully we'll all be here again and continue to cultivate and grow this community and cut our commute times, which is a nice bonus.
Thanks,
I don't know
George.
how to sign off.
George, thank you very much, and Alana, Heiko, and Jamie, thank you very much for doing this. Hopefully, in the future, if people want to, we can have them actually involved in the discussion. But this was our first try at this, so if anyone who's on, we had 46 participants. Anyone who's on feels free to send us an email or give us a call, and we can talk about how we can improve this. This is a first. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you found it useful and helpful, and we will be doing more. We're looking to set the series up every Monday at 4 p.m. I will send an email, but if you have ideas for topics, please do let us know.